Scott wears many hats, including that of acting executive director of the Teaching and Learning Transformation Center. But he comes to you today to share some powerful lessons learned while wearing his teacher hat. We call him, what are we going to call him? Dr. Evil. So please join me in welcoming Scott Roberts.
Good morning, everybody. All right, there we go. So it's really an honor and pleasure to be here today with you and here at ITL to talk about teaching evil. And I think it's really important that I start with a couple disclaimers because we are going to be talking about evil. There are going to be some triggers of a phobia that many of you may have. There are going to be statistics. That's right, math. You don't have to do any math, but you just look at it. And there's going to be some shameless emotional manipulation, so I'm sorry in advance. It's really fantastic to be in this room and in the rooms like this that are designed to really facilitate the kind of student-to-student interaction that transforms courses and experiences and learning. And we're going to get a chance to really quickly test that out. So as you notice, the room is designed in tiers where each tier has 2 rows, and the front row can turn around to face the back to quickly form small teams. And so I'm going to ask the front rows to turn around and make eye contact with some folks in the back rows, find a partner, find a pair, find somebody to talk to. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do what we call an idea sprint. You're going to have exactly 60 seconds. I'm going to put a sentence on the board with a blank. And in your groups, I want you to come up with as many ways as you can to finish this sentence. All right. Ready? And act as evil when it is blank. Go. All right, that's the gong. That's your minute. All right, so I really want to hear just a couple examples, so I'm just going to point to areas of the room. Someone shout out a word or phrase that came up. So right over here. Intentional. Intentional. All right, so there's an act of intentionality, of planning, of known cause. Over here. Malicious. All right. Justified. Justified. Ooh. Someone up here? Manipulative. Harmful. Harmful. Down here? Destructive. Destructive. Thoughtless. Thoughtless. Okay. Islamophobic. Islamophobic. Cruel. Cruel. Violent. Violent. One more in the back? Hurtful. Hurtful. All right. Well, evil is a lot of things, right? It turns out it's actually really hard to define. And this is the first writing assignment that my students have in the course, is to come up with their own personal definition of what they believe evil is, and, I didn't plant this, to argue whether or not something they themselves believe is evil could ever be justified. Right? And so throughout the course, students apply their own personal definition to what's evil and why. I don't define it. In fact, I refuse to share my definition, but they learn from other scholars throughout the course how they think about evil. If you're interested, by the way, these kinds of short burst timers are great for student activity and discussion. So if you go to our website /timers, I created a template you can download and embed into your own slides and customize the timing for any sort of structured mini discussions like that. Work really well. All right, so let me just give you a little bit of context. So it was the spring of 2011. I had just started a new job as the director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Psychology. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, naive. And there was also a new general education program rolling out in a new category called I-Series courses. And these were intended to be courses that were designed around a really big, interesting question that would expose students from all disciplines with no prereqs to how scholars in your field think about answering these kinds of really big questions. And a week into my new job, my associate chair came to me and said, we need 120 seats of an I-Series course for the following fall. Our plans fell through, and we have a week to submit a proposal. We need to find someone who's willing to create a course in a week to submit it for this. No hesitation whatsoever. I said, I'm on it. Psychology of Evil, it's mine. And so in a week, I designed a draft syllabus, put together the proposal, submitted it, and it got approved, so now there was no surrender, right? I had to teach this course. And just to give you just a broad sense of the kinds of things that this course is designed to cover, it starts out with a module on the psychological perspective, helping students understand how psychologists think about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and the tension between personality and the social situation. They get a crash course in scientific psychology, how do we actually conduct the research that informs our view. They look at the research on why good people sometimes make bad decisions, and even why normal people sometimes do things that we and even they might define as evil. We look at the research on why we don't always help people when we have the opportunity to do it. We look at the philosophical root causes of evil behavior. We look at research on how to increase empathy, trust, and goodwill. We look at it from an evolutionary perspective. How did our species evolve a capacity for incredible altruism and incredible evil? We look at research on how do we reduce hatred between groups that are motivated to harm each other. We look at the evidence that exposure to violent media affects us and causes more aggressive thoughts and even more aggressive behavior. We look at the brains of psychopaths, and they learn structurally why my brain is different than the average human brain. And we look at the different categories of mass murderers, what leads to these kinds of horrific events. How do we understand it, and how do we apply that to even prevent it? If you're interested in learning more, I have since created an open educational resource for the course. So this is now the sort of textbook. If you go to go.umd.edu/evil, you'll see the whole thing laid out there for students and for anybody that's interested in browsing through. So also just to give you a sense of the structure of the course when I started out, in terms of the assessments that were involved, there were 12 weekly worksheets. Worksheets are pre-class quizzes that are administered through ELMS. We're talking 30 to 50 questions on average, very extensive, that guide students through everything that they are asked to read and watch before coming to class. It gives them feedback instantly, and it makes sure that they're coming prepared not only with the content that they're going to need to apply to be an active participant in a class meeting, but also with the questions that they have on what they truly don't understand yet. There are 20 daily clicker quizzes. I'm a big fan of clickers for engaging students with polling and graded assessments all throughout the class meeting. There are 6 short writing assignments. The first is defining evil. So is the last. I asked them to redefine evil and talk about how what they've learned in the course has informed their opinion. And the others are designed to help them apply things that they've been learning in a sort of real-world context. And then there are 3 cumulative exams that are administered in class on laptops via ELMS. Now, I had a great idea, right? I was going to be teaching this in the fall of 2012, which meant that I had the whole summer to prepare all of this. It didn't exactly work out that way, right? They caught up to me by week 2. And so I was literally a week ahead of my students building this course as we were going, building the road as the train was, right? The cars were coming down in. But that said, I thought it was going really well. And everything was coming together, and everyone seemed engaged. And then I reached a moment of desperation. It was Thursday, October 25, 2012, around 10 p.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table, and I was burnt out. And for someone who I thrive on my own chaos and stress, right, I just had nothing left. I had been building this course late at night, ahead of my students, on top of a full-time job and all the other things that we all do, and I just didn't have it in me anymore. But worksheet 8 was due on Tuesday, right? And the thought of the hours it was going to take to put this together and get it online tonight, I couldn't do it. But I knew that if I didn't get it done tonight, then my students were going to riot. Because it wouldn't be fair to them, right, to give them all of this work without enough time to do it appropriately. And yet, I just couldn't give away the points. I mean, I am Dr. Evil after all, right? So I couldn't just, that would be admitting failure. That would be quitting, and that was unacceptable too. So I literally sat there with my head in my hands in despair. What am I going to do? I don't have it in me. I can't give it away. And it just felt dark. And then suddenly I had this just random, fleeting moment of inspiration in my desperation. Yeah. In the darkness, I had this moment of desperate inspiration. I opened up the laptop. I posted an announcement to my students. I said, you learned a lot about evil, so just go do something good for a stranger, tell me about it, and you get the full points. And then I did something amazing. I slept. And then the weekend goes by, the week starts, we had a big storm come through the area, and all of a sudden I had all of this stuff to read and grade. It was the best grading ever. Now, in part because everyone was going to get the full points no matter what, right? So I didn't actually have to grade anything. But even more so because I got to read 120 stories about students going out and doing some sort of act of kindness for a stranger. Just to give you a few examples from that very first semester, the kinds of things that students described. One student stood out in the storm, handing out umbrellas to people that didn't have one. Someone ate a meal with a lonely stranger. Someone gave a homeless family money, clothes, and a stroller. Someone helped a boy who was being harassed by bullies. They intervened. Someone helped a stranger assemble IKEA furniture. The people laughing have put together a lot of IKEA furniture. Someone helped an old woman cross the street. It sounds so cliche, but it actually happens, right? Someone gave firefighters a thank you note, food, and a donation. Someone got a dangerously intoxicated girl home safely. Someone even washed a veteran's hands in an inaccessible restroom in a store. He was in a wheelchair and couldn't reach the faucets, so my student washed his hands for him. And needless to say, I was really struck by the impact of the things they were doing. And I didn't tell them that this was a desperate accident on my part, right? I just played it cool, and I made it a permanent part of the course. So now it's called Real World Assignment Number 1, where I ask students to go out and do a random act of kindness for a stranger and write a short paper about it. I asked them to tell me what they did. I asked them to reflect on it and to tell me, based on things they've learned in the class, why would you have not done it otherwise? Why wouldn't you have done this thing had you not been asked to do it? Because that was the rule. You couldn't do something you would have otherwise done. I asked them how they felt before, during, and after whatever happened. And I asked them, what, if anything, do you hope happens next? So I was really interested to learn, well, what did they really do? How do we take a step back from an individual semester and look at this? And so what we did is we read every single one of these papers and coded between summer 13 and summer 15. We're looking at 377 acts of kindness that were submitted by students. And there's a lot more data on this than I can share during our time together today, but I want to highlight some of the key takeaways that I found. First of all, it turned out that most students had no idea what to do with this. And they wrote about this, right? That they didn't know what to do. Some of them had a clear plan. They went out, they bought umbrellas, they knew what they were going to do, right? Some kind of had a rough idea and figured it out as they went. But 3/4 of the students really didn't know what to do, and then they stumbled into a moment. They found this opportunity that they didn't plan, oh, I can do something right now. And some of them even wrote about the relief of sort of, discovering that, oh, good, I can get this done. Right, so the majority of students didn't know what they were going to do before they did it. So I asked them, what gets in the way? Why wouldn't you have done what you were going to do? And we looked at all of the course concepts that they mentioned in their paper. And I've blanked out all of the other ones because I don't have time to discuss what each one means, but I'm happy to talk in more detail about it later. But the thing I want to really point out is that by far the most common thing that my students commented on was the bystander effect and diffusion of responsibility, which in short means that what they recognized was that they saw this stuff happening all the time. They just didn't feel responsible. That's somebody else's problem. Somebody else will take care of that. Somebody else will help. That's somebody else's responsibility. Right? The more we can give that away, the less pressure we feel to actually do anything about it. And so it really strikes me that in learning about this bystander effect, students recognized that they were being bystanders and they chose to be something different. Now, I asked them to tell me about how they were feeling, right? And so I asked them, how did you feel before you walked up to this person? And so 9% didn't actually comment on that. 10% of the students said they were happy or excited before they walked up to somebody. 27% said they didn't really feel anything in particular or nothing striking, right? 41% were anxious. They were uncomfortable, they were nervous, they were worried. 13% were terrified. Right? Taken together, over half were scared because strangers are scared. Right? That's the phobia. We talk about the fear of public speaking, the fear of talking to strangers, right? We're afraid of each other. And I asked them to confront that fear and walk up to this person anyway. So then we looked in their papers about whether or not they said anything about the other person or persons. Right? How did they respond to you? Because that fear was obviously built on the idea that this might not go well. 44% didn't comment on it, but look at who did. Only 0.5% of these strangers reacted in any way with annoyance or disinterest. 28% were really happy. 26% ecstatic, right? So if you kind of erase the 44 because we don't really know, virtually everybody that commented on another person's response said it was overwhelmingly positive. So it turns out strangers aren't so scary after all. And we looked at how did students describe how they felt after they did whatever they did. 37% felt happy, they felt relieved, they felt great. 59% felt ecstatic. They said it changed their day. They felt good about themselves all day long from that one little interaction. In fact, spontaneously, a third of them wrote in their papers something to the effect of, I want to do more things like this. If they expressed any negative emotion at all, it was they felt bad that they hadn't been doing this. That it took this course, it took this assignment for them to realize who they wanted to be and who they could have been all this time. So we also looked at students' attitudes towards all sorts of things before and after the semester. So now we're looking at students between fall of 2012 and summer of 15, total of 8 sections and 508 students. There were more students than that, but this is the 94% of all students that took both the pre and the post. Yes, I incentivized with extra credit to get that response rate. All right. So again, there's a ton of data, and the one piece that I want to share with you was I had asked my students, I've done something recently that has made the world a better place. And I was actually really impressed to see that before the class started, 61% of students agreed or strongly agreed that they had done something to make the world a better place. At the end of the semester, that went up to 87%. So it turned out that there was a surprise learning objective. I say surprise because it surprised me just as much as it surprised any of my students, right? And it was that what you say and do matters. It matters to other people, and it matters to you. And the truth is that we both feared. In that moment of desperation, not knowing what to do, I was afraid. As they thought about what they were going to do, they were afraid. They feared their own discomfort, stepping out of what for them was normal. They feared the judgment of other people. They feared feeling unprepared for whatever was going to happen next. They feared the rejection of these strangers, the fear of failure, the fear of being vulnerable to other people, the fear of embarrassment, even the fear of ourselves, of what we're able to do and what we don't do. They feared all of this, and yet they were fearless. They feared it, and they did it anyway. And that, to me, is what the Fearless Teaching Framework is all about, because teaching innovations are scary. Sometimes the stakes are high, right? But today, you get to come together with your colleagues to learn about all of the things that they fearlessly did to advance teaching and learning, to advance evidence-based practices, to advance compelling, meaningful assessment of true learning, to advance the content in their course, to connect it to the lives of our students, and to advance the climate in the room. These are things worth fearing, and they're worth doing anyway. I want to share with you a little bit more about one submission. There's been over 590 now of these papers from students. And one of them goes back to the fall of 2012, again, the first time I taught the course. And pictured here is Eden, with her permission, who bought a man who was experiencing homelessness a meal. And actually, that's not unusual. It turns out 18% of my students did something to benefit somebody who they believed to be homeless. But Eden did something a little bit different because she went to the restaurant, she saw this gentleman sitting outside, and rather than just give him the food, she also wanted to give him a little bit of time. So she invited him to come into the restaurant and have lunch with her there. And it started out awkward, but then they started talking. They ended up talking for 2 hours about life. And she wrote in her paper when she submitted this story that she learned more about people in those 2 hours than in all of my life. Because what she learned was this gentleman was just like any one of us. And because of a tragedy in his life, he fell apart. His life fell apart. He lost his job. He lost his home. And what she realized was that this could be any of us. And we need to remember that they're not something different, that they're one of us. And I think that this story, to me, speaks to the power of the moment, the power of the time, the power of the human connection that was worth far more than the value of whatever meal she may have purchased. And if that was the story, right, if it ended there, I think it's a story worth telling. But in this particular case, there's a little bit more. Because the semester winds down, and I get an email from Eden on Christmas Eve. And she thanked me for the course and the experience, and she said that she had gone back home for the break, and she happened to go to the same restaurant she had gone to before. And when the waiter came over, she looked up, and it was the homeless man. And it turns out that unbeknownst to her, the manager of the restaurant observed this and was very curious, even concerned. He sent waiters and waitresses over to kind of do a flyby and just make sure that this young woman was okay. And afterwards, after she had left and he returned outside of the restaurant, the manager went outside. He summoned the man back in to sit him down and ask him, what just happened? What was this all about? And this man glowingly talked about the kindness and generosity of this young woman who gave him more than 2 hours of her time, but some faith in humanity. The manager was so moved by this that he returns to his office. He calls his wife in tears and says, "We have to do something." So they offered him a job at the restaurant and a room in their house at hardly any rent so that he could save up the money from working to move out on his own. And by the time she had gone back now, 2 months later, he was close to doing that. I tell this story because there are 589 other stories, most of which we have no idea what happened next, right? And I share this with my students to make the point that you don't need to know. All you need to know is something like this is possible, that some small gesture can forever change, not just your life, but many other people. And you should do it because you won't know, right? Because it's possible. So not only did I make this a permanent part of the course, but I also made it a group project. So I doubled down. And I asked students, after they had gone out and done their individual act of kindness, which I set up kind of as a surprise. I didn't tell them in the very beginning of the course that they were going to do this. I gave them rather short notice. And then I said, okay, now you're a team, and I want you to come up with your own anti-evil campaign. Right now it has to be planned. You've got to figure something out, go out and do it together. So we have over 90 different group projects that have gone out and done all sorts of things. And I want to share one example with you today. One group in that first semester that I did the group project, this is now a year later, they wrote note cards with inspirational, uplifting messages for every single person in all of their residence halls, hundreds of these cards. They wrote by hand. They had great pictures of them up at night writing these things. And then they went out in the middle of the night and they placed a message under the door for every single student in every single room in each of their buildings, anonymously, right? And what was really cool about it was not only that they took the time to do it by hand and to do it at such a big scale, but they also took the time to write a handwritten uplifting card for every person in the class when they came to present on their project. So they walked around the room and they handed out these inspirational cards. And they gave me one too, which was nice. And I looked down, and this is what the card said. "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you.